Test check. Can you hear me? Hello, hello. Get that test check. Test check. Got that new soundboard working okay back there, Kieran? We're going to hold up today. Good morning, church. How are you today? Oh, man. Thank you so much, Samantha, for reading the scripture. Thank you, Cousin Franz. To be honest with you, I like being on that side when I'm serving God, like behind the guitar and not behind this thing, and this thing. But we're going to make do today. It's such a blessing to be here with you guys today. It's always such an honor when I do feel that God calls me to say something, even though I've got not much to say. It's all Him. So today, to start, I'm going to expose myself a little bit. These are anyone knows what kind of footwear these are? I heard it. They're hiking shoes. Now, if you're a hiker or you like being outdoors, you can tell just by looking at these that this guy doesn't hike. They're still intact. There's all the tread still on the bottom. Oh, thank you. I didn't mean to expose myself that way. Thank you. There's plenty of tread, and the plastic is still on the tip of the shoelaces. Boo, this guy doesn't hike. What are you doing here? Exactly, and that's how I'm going to start today. I don't like to hike, but why not? It makes for, fresh air, and you get to see God's creation, especially on the Sabbath, and it makes a great Instagram photo. Why not? What's not to like about hiking? Let me tell you why. Okay, so at my job, we've been doing this thing together, kind of team building. It's not really related, but all my work friends go. And we go on hikes together. The problem is my boss and my other friends are much more fit than I am. Okay, I've been going to the gym. I know you can't tell, but I've been going, and I still can't keep up with the pace that they go when they hike. And so we've gone on 2 hikes already. The first one we went, if you're a hiker, you probably know the names of these mountains, and you're probably like, oh, that's like light work. First one we went to Howling Peak, which was, okay. And that was the first hike that I went on. So I went to the store. Actually, I got these from a friend of mine who I was going to the store to buy one. He's like, oh, I got some brand new ones that you can use. And they're like, great. They're North Face. They say Vibram on the bottom. It's like brand name. So I was like, okay, I want to be ready. Then I get my little backpack and put a bunch of snacks, cram as many granola bars and bananas in there as I can, get as much water. I'm like, I'm ready. I can do this. This is my first one, okay? I got the clothing, I got the food and the water. Okay, I'm ahead of the game. Within 10 minutes of hiking at Mount Howling Peak, my friends started to laugh at me because I looked up and I was still wearing my glasses and it was a little cold, and I look up and all the color had drained from my face and my glasses were completely fogged over. My mouth was completely wide open, gasping for air in 10 minutes. The second hike was a little bit better. We hit up Mount Yamnuska, and that one, all of my work buddies admitted that we almost died. We saw a bear. There was a section where there's a big sign that says, if you don't know what you're doing, turn around, go back down, take your Instagram photo, and get out, because you don't want to keep going this way because there's no path. But we went anyway because peer pressure, and everyone wanted to show that, hey, we can do it, we got it. So I don't got it. And I don't got it as I'm walking up there. Guys, I really don't got this. You remember last year what happened? Anyways, so we start scrambling. The scrambling portion, if you don't hike, the scrambling is when there's not a trail and you're kind of grabbing on loose rocks and praying, and you start realizing that you can actually pray and that you're hoping that there's a God because all of these rocks are loose. And there's a section in Mount Yamnuska where it's literally like from the edge of this stage to here, and there's just a chain. And you just kind of hope that you have enough traction to make it through, and then it's just straight down. Mind you, I didn't make it that far. My legs started to give out from either being tired or just being too nervous. So I just watched as my friends continued on, and they told me about it after. It's that trying to keep up with the mates and the physical demand. It really starts to get scary for me when my legs start to cramp and I start to worry that I won't be able to make it through. I start to slow down, and I start to wonder, how long is it going to take for me to get to the top of this mountain? We're kind of I don't want to be like hiking in the dark now, which was a scary story that one of the hikers told us. He said him and his wife, they went to the same mountain, except they took a wrong turn, and they ended up adding another hour, and it was getting dark, and you couldn't see where you were going. I'm like, why would you do that to yourself? What is wrong with you? There's a fear that I might get left behind. There's the fear of the unknown. That starts to kick in. Both hikes, I'd never been to those places before, and some of my other friends had already been there. My fear of heights starts to kick in. The scrambling portions, make sure you don't slip. Make sure you don't take the wrong turn, because you might be going back up the mountains instead of going down, especially when it starts to get dark. It can get difficult to know which way you're going. Start to get a little uncomfortable when you start running out of water, and you start to get a little thirsty. And then bears. Enough said. Sure, the great outdoors is pretty, and like I said, makes for a great social media shot. But when you're in nature, there's no rules. There's no rules when you're in the wild. In the comfort of civilization, there's plenty of rules and systems that are intended to keep you safe. And in hiking, yeah, there kind of is. They kind of mark out the paths and put ropes. But for the most part, when you're in the wild, there's a lot of things that you can't control. Anything could happen. And yes, I get it. I'm also a very pessimistic person, and these are just the ramblings of somebody who gets anxious really easily. And maybe all of these things, these dangerous things, excites you, and that's why you go hiking. Okay, great. But bear with me for a minute and just realize that, hey, what if you get lost or you slip or you injure yourself, and the fact that you're kind of in the middle of nowhere? Every story of someone getting lost or experiencing some sort of mishap often takes place when they're in the middle of nowhere. You know that feeling you get when you start to get lost while you're driving? So you get your passenger to turn on maps on your phone, only to find that every time you try to set the destination, your phone is just as lost as you are, and it's spinning and rerouting, and then 10 minutes later, your phone charger stops working, and then your phone dies. And then you start to get upset as your passenger starts to bark last known landmarks at you and attempts to retrace and tells you to turn around. And then, heaven forbid, a flat tire doesn't seem so bad, but it gets 10 times worse when you're out in the middle of nowhere, when you're out in the wild, or when your gas light turns on and you realize you might not be able to make it to the next gas station because you don't know where it is. This place, this middle of nowhere place, the boonies, Timbuktu, it's a legitimate place in the Bible where we want to go today. And the Bible calls it the wilderness. So I'm just pray with you guys one more time as we dive into the wilderness. Father God, we're here together as a family in your place, God, and we're asking you to join us today and speak to us today. We're looking to you for answers. We're looking to you for comfort, for grace, for forgiveness, all of the above. So on this Sabbath day, God, we're here and we're waiting for you to come. So please join us in this place and give us all these things in your holy name, I pray. Amen. So why do I want to take you on a journey through the wilderness today? Well, a couple months ago, I was getting a workout in early in the morning when a fellow gym goer at my gym comes up and asks me, well, how are you doing today? And for some reason that day, the last couple of years just came rushing to my mind. I finished a 4-year run of schooling only to miss the experience of a graduation due to the world pandemic. Then I start to question my future, wondering what's next for me. Then experiencing years of what I felt like was loneliness and just feeling lost and confused. Anxious, like my GPS in life was just spinning and recalculating over and over again. The best way to describe how I was, and the way I would describe it to myself, was I was in the wilderness. So every time I would sit down with my time with God, and I'd sit down and have devotions, that was the theme. I'd keep looking for people in the wilderness, and how did they get out? So, to answer my fellow gym mate at that particular moment, I gave my favorite answer. I can't complain. That's my favorite answer. He turns to me and he says, well, the Israelites complained. Oh, I said, ooh, light bulb. Wait a second. I went home that night and asked myself the question, what did being in the wilderness for 40 years bring to the Israelites? And ultimately, what does the wilderness look like for me? What's it look like for you? And what's in the wilderness for you? What's on the other side of that for you? What are you supposed to get out of it? When God brings you through these unknown times, when you just can't seem to see tomorrow, what's in it for you? So I always felt like the story of Israel was a really long story, but when you really condense it down, which is what I want to do today, much of that section of the Bible, which is Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, is full of God laying down the foundation of Israel's core beliefs through Moses. If we factor out these rules and statutes to boil down the story, this is what we get. I'm going to give you a quick crash course on it in case you need a reminder or if you haven't heard the story before. So we find the story of Israel. It starts throughout the entire beginning of the Bible, but they're kind of known as a big nation in Israel, starting in Exodus 1 all the way to about Exodus 12. So the Bible says that Israel was fruitful and increased greatly in the land of Egypt. Now, how did they get there in the first place? Israel came through the family of one man named Jacob, who ended up in Egypt because one of his younger sons, Joseph, who got sent away to Egypt by his brothers, ended up becoming a very important political figure in Egypt. After Joseph, the Israelites, were brought into Egypt, and they were there for 430 years. Want you to remember that today. 430 years. You can find that in Exodus 12, verse 40. In perspective, okay, 430 years ago from today, in our modern calendar, was the year 1593. 1593 was 430 years ago. Now think about the difference between 1593 and 2023. Think about the difference in people, difference in culture, difference in technology, difference in ideas. William Shakespeare was still alive. He was like in his 30s in 1593. The Bible says that a new king arose who didn't know Joseph. Well, it's certainly no doubt that he didn't know Joseph because it's been how long? 430 years. So it's not hard to imagine that Israel at this point was more or less used to their daily life in Egypt. They lived with Egyptians and probably had meshed very well and very deeply with Egyptian culture. They were slaves, but by the time it was time for them to leave Egypt by God's command, they probably didn't know any better than the life they already had in Egypt. Many of the current generation at that point likely had a very mixed sense of culture and shared identity with the Egyptian. Like, for example, let me put it this way. I'm Filipino. Okay? But the sense of identity in that designation, in being Filipino, has changed in 430 years. Okay, this guy named Ferdinand Magellan, he came to the Philippines 501 years ago, and the Spanish was there in the Philippines until 1898, only 124 years ago. There's no way that the general population of Filipinos is culturally the same as they were 430 years ago. And I wasn't even born in the Philippines. So I was born here and I was raised with Filipino and Canadian culture. So what does that make me? And similarly, so Israel didn't have the same solid identity at this point. They were a group of people who just ended up in Egypt along with tons and tons of other African cultures at this time. It's a really important point because oftentimes we give Israel a hard time about their time in the wilderness. In light of the Bible as a whole, we know how the rest of the story plays out. We're a bit hard on them, and we kind of expect them to behave a certain way, as if they've been worshiping God for all these 430 years, that they were the same people that they were for 430 years. Again, think about how much religion can change in 430 years. Think about how much Christianity has changed in 430 years. Now, there's one man, Moses, whose family tree can be traced down to an original Israelite. He was born and raised in Egypt, and he ends up emerging as a leader that God chooses to finally set his people, Israel, free from Egypt. Again, Moses grew up in Egypt and with Egyptians, but I suppose I would argue that he was different because he still recognized Israel as his people, and you find that in Exodus 2, verse 12. Moses ends up encountering God and is led by God to stand up to Pharaoh and to make the famous demand, "Let my people go." Again, in the context of 430 years, you can imagine how weird this must have been for Pharaoh to hear. So now we're in Exodus 6 all the way to 15. Through Moses, God makes a huge announcement to the Israelites who have been in Egypt for 430 years. And we find this in Exodus 6, verse 6 to 8. He says this, he says, "I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them. And I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. You shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you from under the burdens of the Egyptians." So who is going to bring them out? God is. Whose people is this? This is God's people. Keep that in mind too. Then, what's next? We get the 10 plagues. They're the wondrous signs from God that probably made Pharaoh soil his underwear a few times. And then Israel is rushed out of Egypt like little kids late for school. And by the way, their first complaint to God was at this point, when they're facing the water. God gets them out and shuts them up with one big miraculous sign, the famous Red Sea incident, where the Red Sea is split in half. So God makes a way for his reclaimed people, his newfound friends, in the middle of the sea. So that's the backstory here today. Now, Israel's in the wild. The Bible says that they're in the wild for 40 years. Mind you, a lot of scholars say that, I don't know, it was probably 40 times as long as that journey should have taken. This is a very large group of people. So it's the Israelites along with what the Bible calls a mixed multitude, which probably was a mix of Egyptians and other locals who wanted to get out of Egypt because Egypt had just lost the battle. Like Pharaoh's entire army just got swallowed up in the sea. So it's like, well, we don't want to be with the losers. We kind of want to be a bandwagon and kind of join like the Kansas City Chiefs. You know what I'm saying? So it was probably a mix of people some Egyptians, some other African cultures, and a lot of Israelites who were like, okay, who cares about Egypt? Let's move on. So their life that they and their grandpas and their grandmas and their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents knew for 430 years just left behind them. Into the wild. 3 days into the wild, and the people begin to complain. Here's where we're like, this is what you don't want to do if you're a follower of God. 3 days into the wild, and what do they complain about first? They complain about not having anything to drink, which God provides. 2 months into the wild, they complain about no food. That's a fair thing to complain about. I like this one. They say that if God is going to kill us, then he should have just killed us in Egypt. At least there was food there. That's something I would probably say. God gives them bread, and he calls it manna. Okay? 2 complaints so far. And then they complain about water again, and then God gives them water through a rock. Okay, now, pit stop in the wilderness here. This is the point in the story where we typically start to really detach ourselves, kind of separate ourselves from Israel, from desert Israel anyway. We start to blame them a little bit, and we often say that, you see, this is what you don't do if you want to be a follower of God. They didn't believe. They were weak. They tested God. They caused Moses a big headache. I mean, how could you not blame them? Like, they were failing to realize they had God. They had the Creator. The same God who got them out of Egypt with them along the way, who freed them from slavery, who offered a new life to them. They had that God traveling with them and provided for them along the way. But I want to suggest something to you today, that we can only detach ourselves from desert Israel so much. There's only a certain point that we can go with that. Because think about it, it's been 430 years since Israel had first inhabited Egypt. And it's only been a few months when God first declared to his new generation of people that he was going to be their personal God. It's only been recently. He hasn't really said anything like that, and that's why the story of Exodus is so key, is because that's the first time God reaches out to this people. He always reaches out to Abraham, to Isaac, and he kind of like one-on-one with them says, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. I'm going to make a great nation out of you. But this is the first time where God says, you are going to be my people. This right here, this is my people now. This is what we've been waiting for. This is the big show here. But they just met God personally recently. They didn't know God. They didn't know what God was entirely capable of. They didn't know what this relationship meant. In 430 years, they lost touch of who God might have been to them, which was obviously a very different picture because there was no Red Sea incident 430 years ago. This is only the beginning of a relationship that God was taking the initiative of starting, okay? With this in mind, I also want you to imagine for a second how people today would react, regardless of if they're churched or unchurched, believers or non-believers. If all of a sudden they're picked up from what they know, they have the place of food, a home, a job, a way to provide for their family, to keep their family alive, and all of a sudden thrown into wilderness, with all that taken away, to follow some guy who says that God is with them. Would you start to wonder, okay, so he split the sea, he gave us water, he gave us food, but surely that's going to run out. What have I done to deserve all these miracles? Surely we're going to reach the bottom of the miracle jar eventually. Like, he just sweetened up water by throwing a stick in it. He got water to come out of a rock. He split the Red Sea. He gave us food falling out of the sky. Like, what is that? That's got to be it. There's no way there's more. Because we didn't do anything. We were just a bunch of slaves, and all of a sudden we got dragged out into the middle of nowhere by this crazy dude named Moses. And the interesting thing about it is if you kind of like relate Israel to their forefather, his name was Jacob before, and then he was renamed Israel. When Jacob did what he did to his brother, he stole his birthright. Eventually, they meet up, and Jacob was afraid. And what ends up happening is Esau shows him grace when they have their second meetup, and Jacob's like, look, I don't deserve this. I'm afraid because you have every right to kill my family. Whereas Esau kind of reacted a little bit different. He kind of felt like he deserved that birthright or whatever. But we see it in Israel's identity. This is who they are. They're just little old slaves who were pulled out of Egypt. Why do we deserve for God to show us another miracle? What have we done? And so it forces us to think, what do you do when you've been thrown in the wilderness? Let's say you finished school and you find yourself owing a ton of money, but you don't have a job or a job that pays well, so you have no idea how you're going to pay it all off in a lifetime. Or you got let go from your job and you have to figure out how to make ends meet. Or the person that you thought you would end up with didn't turn out to be the person you thought they were. And now you're alone and you're having a real hard time trusting people. People who you thought you could trust suddenly look like strangers and you feel lost. You thought you knew what was next in life, and you had a plan, but the whole world shut down because of a pandemic, and you've been stuck alone at home, and you feel like you've lost friends over the last couple of years. You thought you'd get to grow old with your parents, and that your kids would get to enjoy going to visit grandma and grandpa, or that you would get to see your grandkids someday, but then death is a thing, and your parents or your children went away before you did. Or maybe you had a huge aha moment with God at some point in the past, and He's helped you through this wilderness before, but now it seems like it's been 430 years since you felt that spark with God. And you start to wonder, is God really still listening to me? Does He still care? Is there going to be another miracle with my name on it? You start to wonder, why is He dragging me out to the middle of nowhere, away from where everything was good and where I could smile and be okay with existing, and just to now wake up to loneliness, anxiety, fear, and not be able to see the next step? You start to wonder, maybe I'm not worth another one of God's miracles. Maybe I've used them all up. There's no way He's going to show me another one. Just for me? Sure, we could say that the Israelites tested God, and they did. I get that. But at the same time, these were a scared, confused bunch of people who were just beginning to get to know God on a personal level at that. What if they weren't testing God's power or his abilities necessarily, but maybe they were testing this new relationship that he's trying to start? And what better place to do it, to hash it out, than in a place with no distractions, away from the busyness of Egypt, away from regular life, the wilderness. I'm going to blaze through the next part here as well. I don't want to focus too much on this because the newly formed relationship between God and his people really runs into a wall here when they hit Mount Sinai, okay? This is the part where it really starts to, this is, got to pump the brakes a little bit. Moses is called up to the top of the mountain to meet with God and get the 10 Commandments, the law, the covenant between God and his new people. And then there's a huge thunder and lightning and earthquake and big cloud combo that covers the mountain. It's extremely terrifying. But he's there for how long? He's there for 40 days and 40 nights at the top of Mount Sinai on his hike. So the people, and remember, there's quite a few different types of people there who are with the Israelites, not just the OG Israelites. They say to Aaron, look, we don't know what's happened to Moses up there, but, can you just make us gods to go before us? I don't want to spend too much time analyzing because there's so many this is a weird story, and I encourage you to read it because Aaron's just like, look, I just put rings in the fire, or Aaron said, I just threw these gold rings in the fire, and then this calf came out. It's kind of weird why he says a bunch of things. I encourage you to look at it for yourself more in depth. But Aaron asks for all the gold of the entire camp, thinking that, no, there's no way people are, Aaron asked for the gold, thinking that there's no way they're going to give me their gold. Why would you give me your gold? Okay, so like, okay, good. Maybe I can buy some time here. Okay, give me your gold. All of a sudden, they gave their gold. Give me the gold of your wives and your children. And then all of a sudden, unexpectedly, they just gave him the gold. And they're like, oh, okay, wait a second here. So he's like, okay. I'll build you the god. Thinking that maybe he can just make a little project, go into the shop, and he take his time, and then maybe by then, Moses will come back. But then he still takes a while to come back, and so he ends up with a golden calf. And the people say, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, which is weird because he only made one calf. Why are they saying there's a bunch, which is something to think about. And they immediately resort to worshiping this idol, just like that. The people replace God. Meanwhile, back at the mountain, God tells Moses, go down, for your people, whom you have brought up out of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. All of a sudden, it's Moses' people. And all of a sudden, it's Moses who was the one who brought them out of Egypt. Remember, his first declaration was, I am the one going to bring you up. But now, all of a sudden, hey, it's your problem, buddy. It seems like God doesn't want anything to do with this anymore. Now, Moses can't believe what he's hearing here, so he, instead of just dropping the 10 Commandments there, because clearly it's all over, he brings them with him. And he goes down to the mountain to see what's going on for himself, because he can't believe it. And surely, he hears the sounds of a party, and he realizes the horrible thing that the people have done. They've replaced God. There's no defending what the people have done here, okay? Don't get me wrong. But it really goes to show how we as people can be when we start to doubt, and when we're afraid, and when we're confused, and when we're lost. The things that we can resort to. We take matters into our own hands and replace God's guidance with the things that are more immediate, things that bring immediate comfort, the things that appeal to our senses, our flesh, the things you can see, that you can touch, that you can taste. And so now it's God versus Moses in Exodus 33. God's hope to foster a new relationship with his people comes to a screeching halt. And to me, this is where the story starts shifting gears, and this is kind of where we got our scripture for today. Now, before Moses even got down from the mountain, God already warned Moses. In Exodus 32, verse 9, it says, and the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now, therefore, Therefore, let me alone, leave me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them in order that I might make a great nation out of you instead, Moses. And Moses responds right away. Pause, he says. He stands up to God, and he says, hold on a minute. Are you really going to make the Egyptians back in Egypt think that you brought all these people to the wilderness just to kill them? And he says, remember, as if God forgot. Remember your promise to Abraham, Isaac, Israel, or Jacob, that they were the chosen ones to be the forefathers of this great nation that you were building. So God decides not to destroy Israel. And what a leader Moses was to stand up for his people at this time. He didn't even see what they've done. He didn't know what was going on. But his automatic response was to stand up for his people, even though they've caused him so much grief already. Now, after the golden calf fiasco, God talks to Moses again as they get ready to leave Mount Sinai and continue their journey. Exodus 33, verse 3. The Lord said to Moses, "Depart, go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt." God's still mad. God's still big mad. He still doesn't want to claim these people for his own. This is Moses' problem. He says, you have brought them out of Egypt. This is your people, and this is your mess, Moses. He says, I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. God really makes his feelings known here, and he says, look, I'll still guide you to the place I promised you. I'll still keep my promise. I'll still hold up my end of the bargain, even though you have just completely messed it up. But I can't go with you, because I just might lose it. I might just snap and just end all of you. Have you ever been so mad at somebody that you can't even look at them or be in the same vicinity as them? It makes for a very awkward road trip, by the way. God is still true to his word, and he shows grace here. Even though his people couldn't handle the weight of the fear and the anxiety of the wilderness, even though these people barely gave God a chance before they tried to replace him, he still says, hey, I'll still take you there. I'll give you your own angel. He said, you can still go out to the land of milk and honey, no problem, man. I just can't be there with you anymore. He still shows that he cares for them, and he's still fair, even after pulling a stunt like the golden calf. Yeah, I'll take being able to go to the promised land still and not get nuked in the desert by God himself. But Moses has to run his mouth a little bit, and he stands up to God again. And Moses really defines what this whole stiff-neck thing means just by doing this. It's so good. It's so good, we're going to read it straight from the Bible here today. It's Exodus 33, verse 12. If you want to turn with me or scroll with me there. Exodus 33, verse 12. Exodus 33, verse 12. Moses said to the Lord, I'm reading from the English Standard Version, see, you say to me, okay, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you're going to send with me. You say you're going to send an angel, but you didn't tell me who. And now you have found, yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now therefore, God, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways, that I might know you in order to find favor in your sight. Consider, too, that this nation is your people. This is your people. Get this. God's response. And God said to him, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Moses asks for God's presence, and God says, okay. Good point, you win. As an added bonus, God offers to give rest. Something I would die for is for God to tell me personally that he will give me rest. That's perfect. But Moses keeps going. This isn't enough. He still has to say something else. Like, Moses, that's enough. He said he's going to go with you. Just chill. But he keeps going. He says, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not you're going with us so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other person on the face of the earth? He has to say it again because he has to emphasize something. He says, are we not who we are because you are? Are we not who you are because you're here in the camp with us, struggling with us, walking with us, talking with us, seeing each day, each problem, hearing every annoying complaint that we make to you, winning each victory with us? Isn't this what makes us who we are? Think about the name Israel. Little Bible trivia. It's like one of the first Bible trivia things you learn. What does Israel mean? It means struggles with God or wrestles with God, because Jacob wrestled with an angel. He literally did. But you can't wrestle with somebody if they're not there. The whole identity of Israel is built on the fact that God is there. And Moses is like, we're not who we are if you're not here. And then after this, God says, okay, everything, this very thing that you've spoken, I will do. God already agreed to go with them, but Moses got specific in what he wanted and why he wanted it. He reveals to us the key of surviving in the wilderness right there. And so God goes with them. He continues on with Israel for the rest of the story, and they complain for at least another 5 times. God continues and walks with them for the rest of the scriptures. For the rest of Israel's history in the Bible, God is there walking with them. And the only way to get rid of God, as we see in the Bible, is if you reject him time and time again, if you try to replace him. Eventually, down the road, Israel does become a great nation, and like God promised, and he was still there with them all along the way. But eventually, as you'll read, Israel turns their back on God time and time again. He begs them in all those big, long poetry books you find in the middle of the Bible. He's begging them, let me back in. But they don't. Wicked king after wicked king, until eventually Israel is divided, and then they're destroyed by other and bigger, stronger kingdoms. But this identity of Israel, that God's people is constantly struggling and wrestling with God, is the identity that God is the identity that God is with them continues to live on as Israel rebuilds the temple eventually. And eventually we get into the New Testament. We get into the New Testament where this identity is reborn again. After what seems to be like a long period of time between the Old Testament and the New Testament, we don't hear anything. We get the Messiah. We get Jesus Christ. And what does the Bible call him? Emmanuel, which means God with us. He rebirths that identity again. It carries on. It's who Israel was and is. And now, through Jesus, it's who we are. You see, the wilderness, what I've learned, and I'm encouraging you to kind of hear out today, is that the wilderness is a place where identity is born. The wilderness is a place where identity is born. The story of Israel in the wilderness is a story about how God's people developed their identity and what exactly that everlasting identity was. It was then, and it's going to be until the end of time. God's presence in the camp is what set them apart. God's presence in our homes, our church, our community, and our hearts and our minds is what sets us apart from every other person on the face of the earth. And if you're in the wilderness today, maybe God is cultivating a new identity in you, in us as a church, as individuals, at every wilderness cycle. And what do I mean by wilderness cycle? Check it out. Israel is in the wilderness, what we just read today. Then Israel becomes a great nation, but then they reject God. And then there's a wilderness period again between Israel's destruction and Jesus. Then Jesus reminds and reinvents this identity. He's called God with us, Emmanuel. But then Israel rejects Jesus. They hang him on a cross. So now they're kind of lost again. But then Jesus cultivates a new identity. Again, the church through the disciples. Then this church goes through many periods of wilderness, hardship, and identity is changed again through many fractures. You see a bunch of fighting in the church, and the church just keeps going, oh, I think it's this way, I think it's this way. We should interpret it this way, and we get fracturing in the church, and we get the wilderness again. And then we find a new identity after the great disappointment. And we start looking closer at Jesus' second coming, and we find our identity in the Sabbath. But what about this period of wilderness now? What is the identity that God is cultivating through this church today? Again, it's been way more than 430 years. How about the identity that He's ushering in your life through your personal struggles, your wilderness? Yes, this identity that's being born, it's going to be super different. It's going to be super personalized to each person, each church, each family. But I'll tell you one thing today. If it's anything that you pull out, if you weren't paying attention to me for this whole time, get this. Go into this wilderness that you're experiencing with the foundation of your identity being rooted that God is with you. He was with you yesterday, and He's going to be with you tomorrow. Navigate this wilderness knowing that God is with you and will be with you unless you turn your back to Him and you try to replace Him or you shut the door on Him. But know that even after that, He's going to be ready to come right back in when you open the door and invite Him in.